Greetings, everybody. um, as we begin this week, I wanted to make a comment on the length of papers. I've had some conversation with students about that, and the instructions that I had in the syllabus that I changed. I don't know if anybody's noticed that or not, but in the syllabus originally, I had said two pages maximum for these papers, and that was not so much for my benefit, but if it was for yours, because with these weekly papers, it just seemed like it it would be nice for you to know that I wasn't expecting any real long documents. um, and I really did think that if you wrote succinctly, 2 pages would be sufficient. But especially with some of the longer epistles like Romans, it's almost impossible to do that, especially with the number of times that I've suggested to some of you to increase the amount in the paper that you give to summarizing or surveying the content of the epistle. So that's going to change the length of the epistle, and some of the longer ones, like even the ones we have coming up in the Corinthian epistles and Hebrews and whatnot. So anyway, I really don't care how long the papers are. And, especially if you're thinking of using these papers down the road for your ministry, your teaching, your preaching, write with that in mind. So you might want to include some other things that would be helpful to you if you ever came back to them. I always want my assignments to be something that students could use in the future. All right. So, yeah, write with that in mind. And so you can see the paragraph that I changed in the syllabus on the length of papers. I hope that's helpful. All right, as far as Romans goes, I have taught Romans as a standalone course, so that explains the number of files that I have included in this course for the book of Romans. But they're all in issues that are all in sections of Romans that I think are unique. All right, and so boy, Romans stands out with just so many things that you're not going to find that well expressed in other epistles. To begin with, you've got the first 3 chapters that just are unparalleled as far as their length, as far as laying down how sinful mankind is. And I just say that because, in today's some of our churches where there's such an emphasis upon the love of God and the kindness of God and God not being judgmental and being inclusive, you're not going to have much preaching on these 3 chapters. They're just brutal as far as describing the sinfulness of mankind, and they ought not to be ignored. Somehow we need to be able to teach and preach these principles, I guess without seeming to be condemnatory, but it's truth. And for grace to be grace, we need to understand how sinful we are. That's pretty basic to the gospel message. All right, the next thing you're going to find in Romans that just stands out in my thinking is what Paul does in chapter 6 and 7. I've often thought that if I were to teach a course on spiritual formation, that I would start with a theology of Romans 6 and 7. And Paul takes so much time and effort to explain that we as Christians have been set free from the bondage of sin and death, and the rule of sin in our life. We do not have to commit sin. We will. We still have the sinful nature within us, but we've been freed from what I call the tyrannical rule of sin. All right, and so those chapters are extremely important in that area of theology. Also, chapter 7, 14 to 25 is not about the struggle of the 2 natures within a Christian. Paul is talking about how he himself was freed from the tyrannical rule of sin and the law, because the law and sin kind of work together to secure Jews in their sinfulness, and how he is then freed to live a life in Christ by the Spirit. That begins chapter 8. And so you have a in the file section, there is a section something having to do with Romans 6 and 7, and so that's my view of chapter 7 that you'll find there. It's becoming more of a mainstream view, that this is not talking about the Christians and our struggle with sin in our life, but it's still not probably not the popular view yet. All right. The next thing you'll find in Romans that's unique is Romans chapter 9, and I do have a file on that dealing with election. As also there's a file that I just put on there that's kind of a survey of 9 through 11. 9 through 11 is unique. There's nothing quite like it in all of Paul's epistles. Galatians will touch on it a little bit, but Romans 9 through 11 is unique. It deals with the question of why are there so few Jews being saved today, and that extends to the present day. What's God doing with respect to Jews and Gentiles and their salvation? The next thing is Romans. I won't say anything about Romans 13. The first few verses there about obedience to government. Interesting that this is written to the Romans about the Roman government. But anyway, you're familiar with that passage. That I don't. It's. I don't know that it has any other parallel in Paul's writings. All right, but Romans 14 deals with the issue of debatable things and how we get along with each other, and secondary or even tertiary issues, something the church is just, we've never been able to do that, ever. Churches don't split today over major doctrinal issues. They often split over secondary issues. And Paul explains how we can live with each other even when we have very different convictions about things. And so there's a section on the files too where I talk about Romans 14 and debatable things. So there's a lot there if you want to go back and look at some of those files, and again get kind of reacquainted with the book of Romans. There's nothing like it. And I hope that'll be a benefit to you for years to come, the time you spend in it. All right, so that's it for now. I hope you have a good week. I'm looking forward to reading your papers on Romans. The ones that I have read so far have been good. I appreciate your work, and continue to pray for you. And the Lord bless you as you continue to do your work. Thank you.